The ambulance sirens were still ringing in my ears when my daughter Sandra looked me straight in the face and said, "Mom, we think it's time you moved somewhere safer." I was standing in the emergency room hallway in my hospital gown, an IV still taped to my arm, and she was already talking about a nursing home. That moment, that exact second when I saw the relief in her eyes instead of concern, that's when I knew. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back 3 months to when I still believed my family loved me. Actually, let me go back even further. Because to understand how deeply this betrayal cut, you need to know what I'd sacrificed to build this family in the first place. I'd lived in the same house in Phoenix for 37 years. You know the kind. Desert landscaping out front, those beautiful saguaro cacti I'd planted myself, a porch where I'd watch the sunset turn the sky into layers of orange and pink. My husband, Robert, had died 6 years prior, and I'd managed just fine on my own. Better than fine, actually. I had my routines, my book club, my Tuesday morning walks with Margaret from down the street. I was 72 and in decent health, or so I thought. Sandra lived 20 minutes away with her husband Jeff and their 2 teenagers. My son Marcus was in Denver, working some tech job I never quite understood. They'd both been attentive after Robert died, calling regularly, stopping by for Sunday dinners. I was grateful. You raise your kids to be independent, but you hope they'll still make time for you, right? I remember when Sandra was born. 28 hours of labor, and Robert nearly fainted when they finally handed her to me. She had these tiny, perfect fingers that wrapped around mine, and I remember thinking, I will do anything for this child. Anything. I didn't know then how literally I'd live up to that promise, or how it would be used against me decades later. I'd given up my career for Sandra and Marcus. I'd been working as a paralegal when I got pregnant with Sandra, and I loved it. The intellectual challenge, the independence, the paycheck that was mine. But Robert's mother was old-fashioned, and Robert himself believed that children needed their mother at home. So I quit. I told myself it was temporary, just until the kids started school. But then Marcus came along 3 years later, and by the time both kids were in school full-time, I'd been out of the workforce for 8 years. The legal field had changed. My skills were outdated. When I tried to go back, I was competing with younger candidates who hadn't had career gaps, who didn't need to leave early for soccer practice or stay home with sick kids. So I became a full-time mother and wife, and I poured everything into that role. Every dream I'd had, going back to school, traveling, maybe even becoming a lawyer myself, I folded them up and put them away like winter clothes in storage, thinking I'd get back to them someday. Someday never came. Then something shifted. I noticed it first during a family dinner at Sandra's house. I walked into the kitchen to help with dessert and caught Sandra and Jeff in what looked like a serious conversation. The second they saw me, they went silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence, the kind where you've been caught. "Just talking about Jeff's work," Sandra said quickly, too quickly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I brushed it off. People have private conversations, that's normal, but it kept happening. I'd call Sandra and hear voices in the background, then suddenly she'd step outside to talk to me, her tone changing from animated to measured. Marcus started calling less frequently, and when he did, his questions felt scripted. "How are you feeling, Mom? Are you eating enough? Taking your medications?" The medications question was particularly odd because I barely took any medications. A low-dose blood pressure pill, vitamins, nothing that required monitoring. But he asked about it every time, as if he was checking off items on a list. The exclusion became more obvious at the next family gathering. It was Marcus's birthday. He'd flown in for the weekend, and we were all supposed to celebrate together. I arrived at Sandra's house with a homemade carrot cake, his favorite since he was 8 years old. The house was full of chatter and laughter, but when I walked through the door, conversations seemed to pause, reset, start over on safer topics. I remember standing in Sandra's living room, holding that cake, watching my family rearrange their faces from whatever they'd been discussing to pleasant neutrality. My grandson Tyler was there, 16, and absorbed in his phone, But even he looked up when I entered, and there was something in his expression. Pity, maybe? Or discomfort. Later, I needed something from Sandra's office and walked down the hallway. The door was slightly open, and I heard Marcus's voice, low and intense. "We can't keep avoiding this conversation. She's not getting any younger, and we need a plan." "I know," Sandra replied, "but bringing it up is going to be—" I knocked. The silence that followed felt like being underwater. When Sandra opened the door, both she and Marcus wore the same guilty expression, like kids caught sneaking cookies before dinner. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Of course, Mom," Marcus said, stepping forward to hug me. "We were just talking about work stuff." "Work stuff?" "Right." Because Marcus needed to fly to Phoenix to discuss work with his sister in a closed office at a birthday party. I know you're probably thinking I should have confronted them right then. But here's the thing about family. You want to believe the best. You tell yourself you're being paranoid, that your children have their own lives and you're just sensitive because you're alone now. So I smiled and went back to the party, even though something in my chest felt tight and wrong. But the unease stayed with me. That night, driving home through the dark Phoenix streets, I kept replaying the moment. The way they'd looked at each other when I knocked, the false brightness in their voices, the too quick transition to talking about work stuff. I'd raised these kids. I knew when they were lying. When Sandra was 14 and said she was studying at a friend's house but was actually at a boy's house, I could hear it in her voice. When Marcus claimed he hadn't broken the neighbor's window with his baseball, the guilt radiated off him like heat. This felt the same. They were hiding something big. The signs kept mounting. I noticed Sandra had started going through my mail when she visited. "Just helping you stay organized, Mom," she'd say. But she'd make these little comments about my bills. "This electric bill seems high. Are you leaving lights on all the time?" Or, "You're still paying for that magazine subscription. You don't even read it." The thing was, I did read that magazine. It was a gardening quarterly that I'd subscribed to for 20 years. I read every issue cover to cover and kept them in a neat stack in my study for reference. But when I told Sandra this, she got this look on her face. Patient, condescending, the way you'd look at a child who insists they saw a monster under the bed. "If you say so, Mom," she'd said, and that phrase became her favorite. "If you say so." As if my own memories, my own experiences, were questionable. She started offering to take me to doctor's appointments, which seemed sweet at first. But then I realized she was speaking to my doctors privately, stepping into the examination rooms first, whispering things I couldn't hear. When I asked what they'd discussed, she'd wave it off. "Just updating them on how you're doing at home." But I hadn't told her anything was wrong at home. One time, I insisted on going into Dr. Patel's office first, before Sandra could have her private conversation. I watched her face tighten with frustration, but she couldn't exactly argue without seeming controlling. Dr. Patel seemed surprised to see me alone. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, "I expected Sandra would—" "I'm perfectly capable of speaking for myself," I said, more sharply than I intended. "What exactly has my daughter been telling you about me?" He looked uncomfortable, shuffling papers on his desk. "She's mentioned some concerns about your memory, your ability to manage your medications." "My memory is fine, and I take 1 blood pressure pill in the morning." "That's it? What else has she said?" He wouldn't give me details, citing patient confidentiality, which was ironic since Sandra apparently had no problem violating mine. But the seeds were planted. My own doctor was looking at me differently now, assessing me through the lens of Sandra's manufactured concerns. My independence was being slowly, methodically dismantled, like someone removing bricks from a wall one at a time, hoping I wouldn't notice until the whole structure collapsed. You know how you cling to family unity, like it's a life raft in a storm? That's what I did. I'd spent my entire adult life building this family, creating traditions, hosting holidays, being the glue that held everyone together. Robert used to joke that I was the family's emotional accountant, always making sure everyone's needs were balanced. everyone felt heard and loved. After he died, that role became even more important to me. It gave me purpose. I told myself that family came first, above everything else, even my own well-being. If my kids were acting strange, it was because they were worried about me. If they excluded me from conversations, it was to protect me from stress. That's what families do, right? They look out for each other. I mean, who would want to believe that their own family could betray them? Every time doubt crept in, I pushed it down. I'd raised Sandra and Marcus to be good people. I'd sacrificed so much for them, their college educations, their weddings, helping with down payments on their first homes. We were close. We'd always been close. Or had we? Looking back now, I wonder if I'd confused my devotion to them with mutual closeness. I was always available, always helpful, always there. But were they there for me? Really there, not just performatively present while thinking about what they could get from me. I remembered my mother warning me once, years ago when the kids were teenagers. She'd visited for Thanksgiving, and I was running myself ragged trying to make everything perfect. Sandra wanted a specific pie that required a specialty store trip. Marcus needed help with a college application essay at midnight the day before it was due. Robert wanted the house spotless for his boss, who might stop by. "Annie," my mother had said, watching me buzz around the kitchen at 11 p.m., "you're going to burn yourself out taking care of everyone else. Who's taking care of you?" "I'm fine, Mom," I'd said, waving her off. "This is what mothers do." "This is what doormats do," she'd replied. And I'd been so offended that we didn't speak for a week. I wish I'd listened to her. I wish I'd understood the difference between loving sacrifice and self-erasure. So when Sandra suggested I start giving her access to my bank accounts, just in case of emergency, I agreed. It was practical, she said. What if something happened to me and she needed to pay my bills? I signed the papers at the bank, watching her face light up with what I interpreted as relief that she could help her aging mother. The bank manager, a young woman named Keisha, had hesitated before processing the paperwork. "Mrs. Morrison, you understand that this gives your daughter complete access to your accounts? She can make withdrawals, transfers, anything you could do." "She's my daughter," I'd said, as if that answered everything. Keisha had given me a long look. "I just want to make sure you're comfortable with this. We see a lot of elder financial abuse and—" "My daughter would never—" I'd started, offended. "I'm sure you're right," Keisha had said quickly, professionally. "I just have to make sure you understand the implications." I'd signed the papers with a flourish, almost eager to prove how much I trusted Sandra. Keisha had filed them without another word, but I remember the concern in her eyes. When Marcus called and asked detailed questions about my will, my insurance policies, my investment accounts, I answered honestly. Why wouldn't I? These were my children. The lawyer Robert and I had used for our estate planning had died a few years back, and Marcus said he knew someone good, someone who could help update everything. "You trust me, don't you, Mom?" he'd asked. "Of course I do," I'd replied. And I meant it. That blind faith, that unwavering belief in family loyalty, it was like walking around with my eyes closed in a room full of furniture. I kept bumping into things, getting hurt, but refusing to turn on the lights. Looking back, I can see it now. The manipulation techniques they used. The gaslighting when I questioned things. "Mom, you're remembering that wrong. You're getting confused again. We already talked about this, don't you remember? The constant implications that my memory, my judgment, my perception of reality couldn't be trusted. One incident stands out. I'd been planning to take a trip to Sedona with Margaret, just a weekend getaway to see the Red Rocks and visit some art galleries. I'd mentioned it to Sandra in passing, and she'd seemed fine with it. But when Margaret and I were actually packing the car to leave, Sandra showed up unannounced. "Mom, you can't go," she'd said, her face tight with what looked like genuine worry. "What do you mean, I can't go? Margaret and I have been planning this for weeks. You told me you were dizzy this morning. You said you almost fell in the shower." I stared at her. "I never said that. I haven't been dizzy at all." "Yes, you did. You called me at 8 a.m. and told me you were feeling unsteady. Don't you remember? Margaret was standing there with my suitcase, looking between us uncertainly. Annie, did you talk to Sandra this morning? No, I said firmly. I had breakfast, I showered, I packed. I never called anyone. Sandra pulled out her phone. Look, here's the call log, 8:14 a.m. We talked for 6 minutes. And there it was on her screen. My phone number, that timestamp, a 6-minute call. I felt the ground shift under my feet. Had I called her? Had I been dizzy and forgotten? Was I losing my mind? Maybe you called her and forgot? Margaret suggested gently. I don't know, I said, and I heard the uncertainty in my own voice. We didn't go to Sedona. I told Margaret I wasn't feeling well, that maybe Sandra was right and I should stay home. After Margaret left, disappointed and worried, I checked my phone. No record of a call to Sandra that morning. She'd faked it. The screenshot, the confidence, the concern in her voice. All of it was theater designed to make me doubt my own reality. And it had worked. It was easier to assume it was all just a misunderstanding than to face the truth, that the people I loved most in the world were using my love against me. You see, I'd dedicated years, decades really, to taking care of everyone else, always putting their needs before mine. When Sandra was pregnant with her first child and stuck on bed rest for 4 months, who moved in to help? When Marcus went through his divorce and needed somewhere to stay while he figured things out. When my mother was dying and needed round-the-clock care. Me. Always me. I never hesitated to drop everything for family gatherings or emergencies. My own needs, my own dreams, they got pushed to the back burner so consistently that eventually the burner went cold. I'd wanted to travel after Robert died. Maybe take that trip to Italy we'd always planned. But Sandra needed help with the kids. Marcus needed financial support to start his business. Time, once my own to spend, had become a currency, traded for the tenuous promise of love and belonging. Every holiday I hosted, every crisis I managed, every sacrifice I made, I was depositing into what I thought was a joint family account of mutual support and care. Little did I know that loyalty and sacrifice were being exploited. The financial sacrifices alone were staggering when I really added them up. I'd co-signed on Sandra's mortgage when her credit wasn't quite good enough. I'd loaned Marcus $30,000 for his startup, which he'd promised to pay back, but never had. I'd paid for family vacations, birthday parties, anniversary celebrations. My grandchildren's private school tuition? I covered it for 2 years when Jeff was between jobs. But it wasn't just money. It was energy, emotional labor, the constant availability. I was the free babysitter, the emergency contact, the family therapist. When Sandra and Jeff fought, who did she call at 2 a.m? When Marcus struggled with anxiety, who talked him through panic attacks? I remember one night in particular, 3 a.m, my phone ringing. It was Marcus, in the middle of a full-blown panic attack, hyperventilating so badly he could barely speak. I talked him down for 40 minutes, using the breathing techniques I'd researched after his first panic attack years ago. When he finally calmed down, he thanked me and hung up. I was so wired with adrenaline that I couldn't go back to sleep. I had a doctor's appointment the next morning, but I was exhausted, my own anxiety spiking from the late-night crisis. Did Marcus call to check on me the next day? Did he ask if I was okay after the stressful call? No. I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks, and when I did, he didn't mention it. I'd become so accustomed to being needed that I didn't notice when needed transformed into used. There's a difference, you know. One is mutual, reciprocal. The other is extraction. My health had started to suffer too, though I didn't connect the dots then. Chronic stress, the doctor had said during my last checkup. High blood pressure, trouble sleeping. I'd blamed it on aging, on grief over Robert's death, on anything except the truth, that I was burning myself out for people who were starting to see me as a resource rather than a person. The worst part? I was proud of my sacrifice. I wore it like a badge of honor. My family needs me, I'd tell Margaret during our walks. I'm so lucky to have children who still want me involved in their lives. Margaret would give me this look sometimes, concerned but not wanting to overstep. Once, she'd said gently, "Annie, when was the last time you did something just for yourself?" I'd laughed it off. When you have a family, there's no such thing as just for yourself. God, I was such a fool. It was a health crisis that finally ripped the blinders off. One Thursday afternoon in late September, I was working in my garden, trimming back the oleander bushes that had gotten wild over the summer. The Phoenix heat was brutal, even though it was technically fall, and I'd been out there longer than I should have. I'd skipped lunch, I realized later. I'd been so focused on finishing the trimming before Sandra came over for dinner that I'd worked straight through the hottest part of the day without stopping for water or food. The dizziness hit first. Then my vision went spotty, like someone had spilled coffee on a photograph. I remember thinking very clearly, I need to sit down, but my legs had other ideas. I don't remember hitting the ground, but I remember lying there, cheek pressed against the warm concrete of my patio, staring at an ant carrying a crumb 3 times its size. I tried to call for help, but my voice came out as a whisper. I tried to reach for my phone, but it had fallen out of my pocket and lay just beyond my fingertips, the screen black and useless. I don't know how long I lay there. It felt like hours, but was probably 15 or 20 minutes. The sun beat down on me, and I drifted in and out of consciousness, thinking confused thoughts about the garden, about dinner with Sandra, about whether I'd remembered to turn off the stove. My neighbor Mr. Chen found me. He'd been watering his yard and heard the crash when I knocked over my gardening tools. The ambulance, the emergency room, the chaos of tests and monitors and people asking me questions I couldn't quite process. It all blurred together. Severe dehydration, they said. Heat exhaustion. My blood pressure was dangerously high. They wanted to keep me overnight for observation and IV fluids. And that's when my family had to manage without me. Sandra arrived first, and I expected comfort, worry, the kind of maternal care I'd always given her. Instead, she seemed agitated. She kept stepping out to make phone calls, her voice sharp and urgent in the hallway. When she came back in, she was smiling, but it was the wrong kind of smile. Through the partially open door, I could hear fragments of her conversation. I know. This is the opportunity. Yes, I think we should move forward. She's not going to be able to fight it now. Opportunity? Fight what? The doctors say you're going to be fine, Mom, she said, patting my hand in a way that felt perfunctory. But this is a wake-up call. You can't keep living alone. It's not safe. I've been living alone for 6 years, I reminded her, my voice weak from dehydration, but my mind suddenly sharp. This was just, I was outside too long, that's all. It's more than that. She exchanged a look with Jeff, who'd appeared in the doorway. We've been talking, Marcus and I, and we think it's time to look at other options. Other options? Assisted living, or maybe a nice nursing home. Somewhere with staff, where someone can keep an eye on you. The room tilted in a way that had nothing to do with my blood pressure. I don't need a nursing home. I need to drink more water and stay out of the heat. But Sandra was already pulling out her phone, showing me glossy photos of facilities. Look at this one. It's beautiful. They have activities, meal plans, everything, and it's only 15 minutes from my house. Only 15 minutes from her house. Not my house. Not my home of 37 years, my garden, my neighbors, my life. The photos she showed me were clearly prepared in advance. Saved to her phone, organized in a folder labeled Mom's Options. She'd been researching this long before my collapse. This wasn't a spontaneous reaction to a health scare. This was a plan, waiting for an excuse to be implemented. That's when the truth started to surface. Over the next 2 days in the hospital, while I was stuck in that bed recovering, pieces fell into place. Sandra had medical power of attorney. I'd signed that over a year ago when she'd convinced me it was just a precaution. She'd been talking to my doctors without my knowledge, painting a picture of a declining, forgetful woman who could barely take care of herself. I started asking nurses questions. Had my daughter been here before my admission? Had she talked to my doctors? One nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, who'd been working nights, hesitated before answering. "Your daughter has been very involved in your care planning," she said carefully. "What does that mean?" "She's had several meetings with your care team. She's expressed concerns about your ability to live independently." "Before today? Before I was even admitted?" Patricia looked uncomfortable. "I probably shouldn't say more, but Mrs. Morrison, you should know that you have rights as a patient. You can request that your medical information not be shared with anyone, including family members." That conversation was enlightening and horrifying. Sandra had been laying groundwork for months, possibly years, creating a narrative of decline that existed nowhere but in her carefully constructed story. Marcus flew in, and the two of them had a meeting with my care team that I wasn't invited to. When I demanded to know what was discussed, Marcus got defensive. "We're trying to help you, Mom. You're not making good decisions anymore." "What decisions? I had heat exhaustion, Marcus. I'm not losing my mind." "It's not just this," Sandra interjected. "You've been forgetting things, getting confused. We've been worried for a while." "Give me one example," I said, my voice stronger now that the IV fluids had rehydrated me. "One specific example of when I've been confused or forgetful." They looked at each other, that same conspiratorial glance I'd seen at Marcus's birthday party. "The Sedona trip," Sandra said. "You didn't remember calling me that morning." "Because I didn't call you. You faked that call log somehow. See?" Sandra said to Marcus, as if I wasn't in the room. "This is what I mean. She's getting paranoid." But they'd already decided. My family had been making decisions about my life behind my back, using my health as an excuse to exclude me. The whispered conversations, the private doctor visits, the financial questions, it all clicked into place like a lock opening. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about controlling me. The reality hit hard, like a cold slap to the face. Wait, maybe it was more like a revelation, a painful one, but a revelation nonetheless. I was being erased from my own life, systematically excluded from decisions that affected my future, my freedom, my autonomy. And they were doing it under the guise of love. I remember sitting in the hospital bed on my last night there, watching the nurses change shifts, listening to the beep of monitors from other rooms. For the first time in my life, I felt truly, devastatingly alone. Not because I didn't have family, but because the family I had saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I didn't reach for the daily crossword I loved. That small ritual had been mine for decades. Every morning with coffee, working through the clues, feeling that satisfaction when I filled in the final squares. The hospital had those little puzzle books in the gift shop, and a nurse had brought me one, thinking it would cheer me up. But I couldn't bring myself to open it. It sat on the bedside table, untouched. And somehow that symbolized everything. My routines, my preferences, my small joys. They didn't matter anymore. I was being reduced to a logistics problem, a liability, someone to be placed somewhere convenient. When I couldn't bring myself to open the puzzle, that's when I knew something inside me had changed. I later learned that in 19% of cases, the abuser controls all of the victim's money. It was a sobering statistic I came across in a pamphlet the hospital social worker left me, part of a packet on elder abuse that I initially thought was left by mistake. But as I read through it, recognition washed over me like ice water. Financial exploitation, isolation from support systems, medical manipulation, making decisions without consent. Gaslighting about mental capacity. Check, 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 check. I wasn't being cared for. I was being controlled. And the control extended to my finances, my health care, my living situation. Every aspect of my autonomy was being systematically stripped away. That night, I made a decision. I was done being a ghost in my own life. Who would have thought that a spiritual counselor would become my ally? I'd never been particularly religious, though Robert and I had attended church occasionally. But there was a woman, Reverend Linda Martinez, who volunteered at the hospital. She wasn't pushing religion, just offering a listening ear to patients who needed it. She stopped by my room 2 days before I was discharged, and something about her made me start talking. Maybe it was because she was a stranger, someone outside the toxic dynamic of my family. Maybe it was because she had kind eyes and didn't rush me. Maybe I was just desperate to tell someone the truth. I told her everything. The exclusion, the whispered conversations, the financial control, the nursing home pressure. I told her about the crossword puzzle I couldn't touch, about feeling invisible, about the growing certainty that my own children were betraying me. She listened without interrupting, and when I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a long moment. "Annie," she said finally, "what you're describing is financial and emotional exploitation. It's a form of elder abuse. Hearing someone name it, validate it, was like being given permission to trust my own reality again." "But they're my children," I said, and my voice cracked. "They wouldn't. The statistics say otherwise. Family members are the perpetrators in the majority of elder abuse cases. Love doesn't preclude exploitation. Sometimes it makes it easier." We talked for over an hour. She helped me see the truth, the patterns I'd been denying. Her words were like a balm, soothing yet firm, guiding me to reconnect with my own strength and spirit. "You've spent your whole life taking care of others," she said. "Who's taking care of you?" I didn't have an answer. "Maybe it's time you did," she continued. "You're not powerless here, Annie. You still have choices. You still have rights, but you need to start making them before someone else makes them for you." She gave me resources, names of elder law attorneys, support groups, a crisis line. She also gave me something more important: permission to put myself first. Reverend Linda visited me 3 more times during my hospital stay. Each time, she brought more resources, more encouragement, more validation that what I was experiencing was real and wrong. During one visit, she told me about her own mother, who'd been financially exploited by Reverend Linda's brother. "I didn't want to believe it," she said. "He was my brother. We'd grown up together. But he saw our mother as a bank account, not a person. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd taken almost everything." "What did you do?" I asked. "I fought back. I got lawyers involved. I reported him to Adult Protective Services. I saved what I could of her assets and her dignity. But I wish I'd acted sooner. I wish I hadn't let family loyalty blind me to the truth." Her story gave me courage. If a reverend, someone dedicated to forgiveness and family values, could stand up against her own brother, maybe I could too. "This isn't selfish," she told me before she left. "This is survival." Armed with newfound clarity, I began to speak my truth to key people in my life. I started with Margaret, my walking partner and neighbor. I called her from the hospital and told her everything, the whole ugly truth that I'd been hiding behind excuses and optimism. Margaret didn't seem surprised. "I wondered," she said quietly. "You'd been seeming so stressed lately, and the way Sandra talked about you sometimes. It didn't sit right with me. Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened? Annie, you've been defending them for months. I tried to hint, but you weren't ready to hear it." She was right. I hadn't been ready, but I was ready now. Margaret became my first real ally. She helped me document everything: dates of conversations, financial transactions, medical appointments where I'd been excluded. She took photos of my house, my garden, evidence that I was perfectly capable of independent living. We spent hours on her back porch, going through my checkbook, my credit card statements, my bank records. Every payment to Sandra's mortgage, every loan to Marcus, every family vacation I'd funded. We documented it all. "This is over $100,000 in the last 6 years alone," Margaret said, her face pale as she tallied the numbers. "Annie, this is financial exploitation, clear as day." Seeing it laid out like that, in black and white, made it undeniable. I'd been systematically drained, financially and emotionally, by the people who were supposed to love me most. Then I reached out to my primary care physician, Dr. Patel, who I'd been seeing for 15 years. I requested a meeting without Sandra present, which took some doing since she'd made herself my automatic emergency contact. "Dr. Patel," I said during that appointment, "I need to know what my daughter has been telling you about my health." He looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Morrison, I can't discuss—" "She's been suggesting I'm declining mentally, hasn't she? That I'm forgetful, confused, incapable of making decisions?" His silence was answer enough. "I want a full cognitive assessment," I said. "Official, documented, because I'm not declining. I'm being manipulated, and I need proof that I'm competent." Dr. Patel agreed, and I underwent a battery of tests: memory assessments, cognitive function tests, mental status examinations. I passed everything with flying colors, scoring in the normal range for my age on every single metric. "Mrs. Morrison," Dr. Patel said when we reviewed the results, "I owe you an apology. I should have insisted on evaluating you independently rather than relying on your daughter's reports. You show no signs of cognitive decline." "I need that in writing," I said, "official documentation." He provided it, along with a note stating that I was fully capable of making my own medical and financial decisions, that I did not require assisted living or nursing home care, and that my recent heat exhaustion was an isolated incident related to environmental factors, not declining health. That documentation became crucial in what came next. By informing those who mattered, my doctor, my neighbors, my bank manager, I made sure that my voice, once silenced, was now heard loud and clear. I updated my emergency contacts, removing Sandra and adding Margaret. I requested copies of all my medical records. I made appointments with the elder law attorney Reverend Linda had recommended. I also went back to the bank, to Keisha, who'd processed Sandra's access to my accounts. "I need to remove my daughter from all my accounts," I told her. Keisha didn't say, "I told you so," but I could see it in her eyes. "I'll need to close these accounts and open new ones," she said, "and I recommend we set up additional security measures to prevent unauthorized access." We did exactly that. New accounts, new account numbers, new passwords. I also requested a full accounting of every transaction Sandra had made on my accounts. What I found was shocking. Small withdrawals, never enough to trigger alerts, but consistent. 200 here, 500 there. Over the past 2 years, she'd taken nearly $15,000 beyond what I'd explicitly given her. "Do you want to report this as fraud?" Keisha asked. I wasn't ready to go that far yet, but I kept the documentation. I was building a case, brick by brick. Slowly, methodically, I was building a defense against my own family. The cognitive assessment came back perfect. Dr. Patel apologized for not questioning Sandra's narrative more carefully. "In my defense," he said, "adult children are usually the ones protecting their parents, not the other way around." "Usually," I agreed, "but not always." I also discovered something disturbing during this process. Sandra had been redirecting some of my mail to her house. Bills, financial statements, correspondence from my insurance company. When I confronted the post office, they showed me a change of address form with my forged signature. The signature wasn't even a good forgery. My A was distinctive, with a particular loop I'd developed over decades. This A was generic, clearly copied from something else. "How did this get processed?" I asked the postal clerk. She looked embarrassed. "We don't authenticate signatures on these forms. I'm sorry, ma'am. We should have caught it." She'd been intercepting information, controlling what I saw, isolating me from my own affairs. The paper trail was damning. I also contacted my insurance company, my investment firm, my mortgage holder. I updated all my contact information, removed Sandra as an authorized contact, and requested that any future changes to my accounts require in-person verification with photo ID. Every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. When I finally confronted my family, it was a private affair. I scheduled it deliberately, telling Sandra and Marcus we needed to have a family meeting to discuss my care options. They arrived at my house on a Sunday afternoon, both looking pleased with themselves, probably assuming I was ready to surrender and agree to their nursing home plan. I'd prepared for this moment carefully. The dining room table where we'd celebrated countless birthdays, Thanksgivings, graduations, where I'd served them meals for decades, now held evidence of their betrayal. I'd arranged the documents in neat stacks, each one representing a different category of manipulation. Financial records here, medical documents there, forged signatures in the middle. The house was clean, spotless actually. I'd made sure of that. I wanted there to be no visual evidence to support their narrative that I couldn't care for myself. Fresh flowers sat in a vase on the sideboard, roses from my garden, perfectly arranged. The smell of coffee filled the air from the pot I'd brewed, strong and fresh. Every detail was intentional. I watched them walk up the front path through the window. Sandra was on her phone, probably with Jeff, giving him updates. Marcus looked tired. The flight from Denver must have worn him out. But there was something else in their body language. Confidence. They thought they were coming to close a deal, to finalize arrangements for my care. Instead, they found me sitting at the dining room table with a stack of documents. "Sit down," I said, and something in my voice made them comply. Sandra's smile faltered. Marcus's eyes went immediately to the papers spread before me. I saw the moment of recognition, the flicker of understanding that this wasn't going to go the way they'd planned. Just me and them, face to face. No doctors, no lawyers, no mediators. I wanted them to see my eyes when I confronted them with the truth. The silence before I spoke was heavy, thick with years of unspoken resentment and recent betrayal. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the same clock that had marked time through their childhoods, through Robert's illness, through my widowhood. It had witnessed everything, this house. Now it would witness this. I laid out all the evidence, the conversations I'd overheard, the decisions made without me, the forged signatures, the financial manipulation, the medical interference. I had bank statements showing where Sandra had access to my accounts. I had emails I'd subpoenaed from the nursing home facilities, showing inquiries made in my name without my knowledge. "You've been planning to institutionalize me," I said calmly, "to take control of my assets and my life. You've been working together to make me seem incompetent so you could justify it." Sandra's face went white. Marcus tried to bluster. "Mom, we were just trying to help." "Help yourselves, you mean?" I slid a financial document across the table. "This is an accounting of every dollar I've given you both over the past 6 years. $68,000 to you, Sandra. $35,000 to you, Marcus. None of it repaid. None of it even acknowledged. We didn't ask for—" "You didn't have to ask. I gave willingly. But you wanted more, didn't you? You wanted my house, my savings, my insurance policies, and the easiest way to get them was to have me declared incompetent and locked away somewhere you could control me." The silence was deafening. "I have proof," I continued. "Medical records showing you've been lying to my doctors. Financial records showing unauthorized access to my accounts. Legal documents you forged. And I have witnesses, neighbors, friends, professionals who will testify that I'm perfectly capable of independent living." Sandra found her voice first. "We were worried about you. After Dad died, you seemed so alone, so vulnerable. So you decided to make me more vulnerable?" I cut her off. "You isolated me from my friends, intercepted my mail, controlled my medical information, took money from my accounts. That's not worry, that's exploitation. The money was for your grandchildren, Sandra said, her voice rising, for their education, their future. Then you should have asked me explicitly and kept records. Instead, you took it secretly and hoped I wouldn't notice. It was liberating in a way to see their faces fall, realizing that I knew everything. Marcus stood up. This is ridiculous. We don't have to sit here and be accused. Sit down, Marcus. My voice was steel. He sat. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're both going to sign documents removing yourselves from any authority over my medical or financial affairs. You're going to return the keys to my house, and you're going to leave me alone unless I initiate contact. You can't do this, Sandra said, her voice shaking now, tears forming. We're your children. Then act like it, I shot back. Children protect their parents. They don't exploit them. What about your grandchildren? Sandra played her trump card. You're willing to lose them over this? It was a low blow, and she knew it. My grandchildren, Tyler and his younger sister Emma, were innocent in all of this. I loved them desperately, but I couldn't let Sandra use them as leverage. You're the one choosing to weaponize your children, I said quietly. I hope someday you'll let them know me without your filter, but if you don't, that's your choice. I won't be manipulated anymore. And justice? Oh, it came swiftly. I wasn't satisfied with just confronting them privately. Legal actions were taken, and power dynamics changed. My family, much to their surprise, faced real consequences. The elder law attorney I'd hired helped me file a complaint with Adult Protective Services. The investigation was thorough and humiliating for Sandra and Marcus. They had to account for every financial transaction, every medical conversation, every decision made without my consent. The investigator, a woman named Diana Kowalski, was relentless. She interviewed my neighbors, my doctor, my bank manager. She reviewed documents, phone records, email trails. She uncovered things even I hadn't known about. Marcus had been in contact with several nursing homes, getting quotes for memory care for me, despite my perfect cognitive function. Diana was in her 50s, a former social worker who'd transitioned into elder abuse investigation after her own father had been exploited by a caregiver. She understood the dynamics, the psychology, the tactics used by family members to justify their actions to themselves. They always think they're doing the right thing, she told me during one of our meetings. They convince themselves that they're acting in your best interest, that they know better than you do. But at the end of the day, it's still exploitation. She showed me email chains I'd never seen, communications between Sandra and Marcus going back 18 months, discussing my situation, strategizing about how to approach doctors, which nursing homes had the best financial arrangements for families. Reading those emails was like being stabbed repeatedly. They'd been planning this for over a year, long before my heat exhaustion gave them their excuse. In one email, Marcus wrote to Sandra, "We need to be patient. One incident won't be enough. We need to establish a pattern of decline. Keep documenting everything, every time she forgets something, every time she seems confused. We'll need it for the competency hearing." Competency hearing. They'd been planning to have me declared legally incompetent. Another email from Sandra to Marcus. The financial advisor said if we can get her into assisted living within the next 6 months, we can preserve more of the estate. The longer we wait, the more she might spend down. It was never about my safety. It was about money. My money. The money Robert and I had saved for decades. The equity in the house we'd bought together. The investments we'd carefully built. Diana documented everything, building a case that was ironclad. She even found evidence that Sandra had been researching how to obtain guardianship over me, which would have given her complete control, financial, medical, legal. I would have been effectively erased as a legal person, unable to make any decisions about my own life. The depth of their planning was staggering and terrifying. Sandra lost her power of attorney status officially. The bank accounts she had access to were frozen, and then closed, new ones opened in my name only. The forged signatures were reported to the police, and while I ultimately didn't press criminal charges, the threat of prosecution hung over both of them. More devastating to them, though, was the social consequence. I told the truth to extended family, to friends, to our church community. Remember, research confirms that family members are the criminals in 50 to 60% of financial exploitation cases. This was no different, and when people heard what had happened, the gossip spread like wildfire through our social circles. Sandra's reputation in the community took a massive hit. People she'd done business with, friends she'd had for years, started looking at her differently. Jeff's work colleagues heard about it. The private school where my grandchildren attended became aware that their grandmother was pursuing legal action against their parents for elder abuse. I didn't spread the story vindictively. I simply told the truth when people asked why Sandra and I weren't speaking, why I wouldn't be at family gatherings anymore. Marcus's business suffered too. When word got out that he'd been involved in exploiting his mother, several clients dropped him. His professional reputation, carefully cultivated over years, took damage he'd struggled to repair. One of his clients, a woman I'd met at a charity event years ago, called me directly. "I just wanted to let you know I terminated my contract with Marcus," she said. "If he treats his own mother that way, I can't trust him with my business." But the real justice was simpler than all of that. I changed my will. Everything I'd planned to leave them, the house, the savings, the insurance policies, I redirected to charities. Organizations that protected elders, supported abuse survivors, provided legal aid to vulnerable populations. When I showed them the new will, Sandra's face went from pink to ashen. "You can't do this," she said, but her voice was weak. "I already did," I replied, "and unlike you, I didn't need anyone's permission." I also made provisions for my grandchildren, trust funds that they'd access at age 25, managed by an independent trustee. Sandra and Marcus would have no control over those funds, couldn't access them or manipulate them. The trustee had strict instructions that if Tyler or Emma wanted a relationship with me, they'd have my full support. Seeing them face the music was a relief I can't quite describe. Not because I enjoyed their pain. I didn't. I'd loved these people my entire adult life. But because for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I had control over my own existence. They tried various tactics afterward. Apologies that felt hollow, promises to change, attempts to guilt me by withholding access to my grandchildren. Marcus sent a long email, full of justifications and excuses. He claimed they'd been acting out of love, that they'd convinced themselves I was declining and needed help. He said they'd made mistakes but never intended to hurt me. Sandra showed up at my house multiple times, crying on my doorstep, begging for forgiveness. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I don't know what we were thinking. Please, can we fix this?" But when I asked her to specify exactly what she was apologizing for, she couldn't. When I asked her to acknowledge the unauthorized withdrawals, the forged documents, the medical manipulation, she backpedaled. "It wasn't like that," she'd say. "You're making it sound worse than it was." She wasn't sorry. She was sorry she got caught. But I held firm. I'd learned that forgiveness doesn't mean restoration of trust. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself from them. In the aftermath, I found solace in something I hadn't touched in decades: writing. Poetry and short stories became my refuge, a creative outlet where I could express the emotions that had been bottled up for so long. I'd written a little in college, before life and marriage and motherhood took over. I'd always meant to get back to it, but you know how it is. There's always something more urgent, someone else's needs taking priority. Now, with my mornings free and my mind clear, I started filling notebooks. At first, it was just journaling, processing the trauma, documenting my feelings. But then the journaling became poetry. Raw, honest verses about betrayal and resilience, about the particular pain of family wounds, about the liberation of choosing yourself. I joined a local writers group, something I never would have had time for before. Every Tuesday evening, I met with 6 other people in a coffee shop on Mill Avenue, and we shared our work. They knew my story. I'd written poems about it, and they supported me in ways my family never had. It was like discovering parts of myself that I'd forgotten existed. One of my poems, "The Mathematics of Maternal Love," calculated the cost of devotion in time, money, and pieces of self. Another, "Inheritance," was about what children truly receive from their parents beyond money, integrity, or the lack of it. I wrote a piece called "The Daughter Who Forgot Her Mother Was Human" that got accepted to a small literary magazine. Seeing my name in print at 73 years old felt surreal and wonderful. I submitted more work. Some got rejected, but some didn't, and each acceptance felt like reclaiming territory I'd surrendered too easily. The writing also connected me to a community of other elder abuse survivors. Through online forums and local support groups, I met women who'd been through similar experiences. We shared stories, resources, strategies for healing. One woman, Patricia, became a close friend. Her own daughter had drained her retirement account and abandoned her in a substandard care facility. Patricia had fought back too, and now she volunteered with an elder rights organization, speaking publicly about her experience. "Your voice matters," she told me. "Every time you tell your story, you make it easier for the next person to recognize what's happening to them." So I started speaking up. I gave a talk at a community center about recognizing the signs of financial exploitation. I wrote op-eds for local papers. I became an advocate, not because I wanted attention, but because staying silent felt like letting my family win. My garden flourished too. With time to actually care for it properly, I expanded the vegetable beds, added a small fountain, created a meditation space under the Palo Verde tree. Margaret and I still took our walks, but now we'd end them in my garden, drinking iced tea and talking about everything and nothing. I planted new varieties, heirloom tomatoes, herbs, peppers. I built raised beds and installed a drip irrigation system. The physical work was therapeutic, and watching things grow under my care felt symbolic. I was cultivating life, not just maintaining it. I adopted a dog, a senior rescue named Copper who'd been abandoned by his family when they moved. We were a good match, 2 old souls who'd been betrayed but weren't done living yet. Copper had been at the shelter for 8 months. He was 10 years old, a mixed breed with graying fur and soulful eyes. The shelter volunteer told me his family had dropped him off when they relocated, claiming they couldn't take him with them. "He's been waiting a long time for someone to choose him," she said. I knew exactly how he felt. Copper and I developed routines, morning walks before the heat set in, afternoons in the garden, him napping in the shade while I worked, evenings on the porch, watching the sunset together. Life became smaller in some ways, but richer. I wasn't hosting big family holidays anymore, but I was having dinner parties with friends who actually valued me. I wasn't babysitting grandchildren I wasn't allowed to see, but I was volunteering at a literacy program, reading to kids who lit up when I walked in. Was I lonely sometimes? Yes. Did I miss my children? Every single day. But I was free. And that freedom, hard-won and carefully protected, was worth the loneliness. I started traveling too. All those trips I'd postponed, all those dreams I'd deferred. I went to Italy, finally taking the trip Robert and I had always planned. I walked through the streets of Florence alone, stood in front of the Duomo, ate pasta in small trattorias, and felt my husband's presence in the beauty around me. The Italy trip was transformative in ways I hadn't expected. I spent 2 weeks there, moving slowly through Tuscany, visiting small hilltop towns, tasting wine in vineyards, learning to paint in watercolors from a local artist I met in Siena. I wasn't rushing to see everything, checking off tourist attractions. I was simply being present, maybe for the first time in decades. In a small church in Assisi, I lit a candle for Robert, and then, unexpectedly, I lit one for Sandra and Marcus. Not because I'd forgiven them, but because I needed to release the anger that was still taking up space in my heart. The candle wasn't for them. It was for me. An elderly Italian woman sitting nearby watched me and said something in Italian I didn't understand. But when I looked confused, she switched to heavily accented English. "You pray for someone who hurt you," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "I know this face. I have worn it. The face of a mother who grieves her children while they still live." We sat together in that quiet church for an hour, two strangers bound by the universal pain of family betrayal. She told me about her son who'd stolen from her, who she hadn't spoken to in 5 years. I told her my story. We cried together, these two old women in a church in Italy, and somehow it helped. When I returned to Phoenix, I was different. Lighter somehow, despite carrying the same grief. I took a pottery class and discovered I had a talent for it. My crooked bowls and uneven vases lined my windowsills, imperfect but mine. The instructor, a woman in her 40s named Sarah, said I had emotional honesty in my work. "You're not trying to make perfect things," she observed. "You're trying to express something." She was right. Each piece I made was a meditation on imperfection, on things that were broken and reformed, on beauty that exists despite flaws. I made a series of bowls with deliberate cracks that I filled with gold leaf, inspired by the Japanese art of kintsugi. The cracks weren't hidden. They were highlighted, transformed into something beautiful. One of those bowls sat on my kitchen counter, holding fruit. Every time I looked at it, I thought about how my own breaks had been filled with something precious too. Self-knowledge, strength, autonomy. I reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. Women from my book club, colleagues from my paralegal days, people I'd let slip away when family consumed all my time and energy. One of them, Diane, told me frankly, "You disappeared when you had kids. We tried to stay in touch, but you were always too busy. I'm glad you're back." It stung, but it was true. I'd chosen family over friendship, assuming family would always be there. I'd learned the hard way that assumption was flawed, but now I had the chance to rebuild those connections. Diane and I started having weekly lunch dates. I reconnected with my old book club. They'd kept meeting all these years, and they welcomed me back without judgment. We read novels about women reclaiming their lives, about second acts and reinvention, and every discussion felt personally relevant. I also volunteered more consistently at the literacy program. There was a little girl there, 7 years old, named Maya, who reminded me of Sandra at that age. Same dark hair, same serious expression when she concentrated. Working with Maya was bittersweet, but it also gave me a way to channel my grandmotherly instincts into something positive. Maya struggled with reading, but she loved stories, so I'd tell her stories, some from books, some from my own life, age-appropriate versions anyway. And slowly she started to read more confidently. Her grandmother, who was raising her after Maya's parents died, thanked me with tears in her eyes. "You've made such a difference," she said. "Maya talks about you all the time." That small connection, that ability to matter in someone's life again, filled some of the void left by my estranged family. Not all of it. Nothing could replace grandchildren. But it helped. Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something that might protect you or someone you love from going through what I did. Isolation is one of the most powerful tools an abuser uses, and in cases of elder abuse by family members, it's often the first step. It starts subtly, redirecting phone calls, intercepting mail, gradually limiting your contact with friends or neighbors. The abuser creates a controlled environment where they're your primary source of information and support. Why? Because isolated people are easier to manipulate. When you're cut off from outside perspectives, you have no reality check. You start to question your own judgment, your own perceptions. The abuser becomes the only voice you hear, and that voice tells you that you're confused, declining, unable to make good decisions. In my case, Sandra and Marcus systematically isolated me from anyone who might question their narrative. They discouraged my friendships, took over my doctor appointments, controlled my information access. By the time I ended up in the hospital, I was so isolated that I almost believed their version of reality, that I was declining and needed institutional care. Here's what I learned about recognizing isolation tactics. First, pay attention to changes in communication patterns. If someone suddenly starts filtering who you talk to, monitoring your phone calls, or intercepting your mail, that's a red flag. You have a right to private communication with whoever you choose. Second, watch for medical manipulation. If family members start attending all your doctor appointments and speaking for you, insist on private time with your healthcare providers. Your medical information is yours, and you have a right to discuss it without intermediaries. Third, notice financial gatekeeping. If someone takes over your bills to help but won't show you statements or explain transactions, that's control, not assistance. Maintaining your own access to your financial information is crucial. Fourth, trust your gut. If you feel like you're being excluded from decisions about your own life, you probably are. Your feelings of unease are data. Pay attention to them. Fifth, maintain independent relationships. If you find yourself only seeing people when a family member is present, or if you're discouraged from pursuing hobbies and interests outside the family, that's a warning sign. Sixth, document everything. Keep your own records of financial transactions, medical appointments, conversations about your care. If someone is manipulating you, documentation provides objective evidence of what's really happening. The statistics are sobering. Studies show that socially isolated seniors are more vulnerable to abuse, with isolated elders being 3 times more likely to experience mistreatment. And once isolation is established, the abuse often escalates because there's no one to intervene or question what's happening. But here's the hopeful part. Isolation can be prevented and reversed. Stay connected to your community, even when it takes effort. Maintain independent relationships that aren't mediated by family members. Join clubs, volunteer, participate in activities where you interact with peers. Create a support network of people outside your family who know you well enough to notice changes in your behavior or situation. These people, neighbors, friends, members of your faith community, can serve as a protective factor, a reality check when family members try to control your narrative. And if you suspect someone you know is being isolated, reach out to them. A simple phone call, a visit, an invitation to coffee, it can break through the isolation bubble and remind them that they're not alone. Remember, healthy families respect autonomy and independence. They support your connections with others rather than limiting them. They enhance your life rather than controlling it. If you're experiencing isolation from someone who claims to have your best interests at heart, ask yourself, why would someone who loves me want to separate me from other people who care about me? The answer is usually about control, not care. You deserve relationships that honor your autonomy, your judgment, and your right to make your own decisions. You deserve to maintain the connections that nourish you, and you deserve to be treated as a capable adult regardless of your age. Don't let anyone convince you that accepting isolation is the price of being loved. There's one more thing I want to address before I finish: the guilt. Because even now, even knowing everything I know, even with all the evidence of their betrayal, I sometimes feel guilty for cutting them off. That's the insidious thing about family abuse. Society tells us that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, that we should forgive and forget. There's immense pressure to reconcile, to overlook harm, to prioritize family unity over personal well-being. I've had people, well-meaning people, tell me I'm being too harsh. They're your children, they say. Everyone makes mistakes. You should give them another chance. My response used to be defensive, explanatory. I'd try to make them understand the full scope of what happened, the calculated nature of the exploitation, the depth of the betrayal. But I've learned that some people will never understand unless they've lived it themselves. Now I simply say, you're entitled to your opinion, but you don't have to live with the consequences of their actions. I do. The guilt comes in waves, usually triggered by specific things. I'll see a mother and daughter shopping together, laughing over something trivial, and I'll feel it, that ache of what I've lost, coupled with the nagging voice that says, maybe I was too harsh, maybe I should have tried harder to fix things. Or I'll drive past the park, where I used to take Tyler and Emma when they were little, and I'll remember pushing them on the swings, their delighted squeals, the way Emma would say, "Higher, Grandma, higher." And the guilt will wash over me. They're losing their grandmother because of their parents' choices, and while intellectually I know that's not my fault, emotionally it's harder to accept. I've worked through a lot of this with a therapist, a woman named Dr. Chen, who specializes in family estrangement. She's helped me understand that guilt is a natural response to violating social norms, even when violating those norms is the right choice. You were raised to believe that family loyalty is paramount, she told me. That mothers sacrifice everything for their children, that you should love your family unconditionally. So when you set boundaries, when you protect yourself, it feels like you're doing something wrong, even though you're actually doing something necessary and healthy. She had me do an exercise where I wrote down all the should statements I carried about family. Things like, I should forgive my children no matter what. I should put family first. I should keep trying to make it work. Then she had me reframe each one with reality-based statements. I should forgive my children no matter what became, I can forgive them while still protecting myself from further harm. I should put family first became, I should put my safety and well-being first, then consider family relationships. I should keep trying to make it work became, I tried for years. They're the ones who chose exploitation over relationship. The failure is theirs, not mine. It helped. Not completely, guilt is persistent, but enough to give me tools to combat it when it arises. But here's what those people don't understand. This wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. What Sandra and Marcus did was deliberate, calculated, sustained over months or years. They made choices, repeatedly, to exploit me. And forgiveness doesn't require me to put myself in harm's way again. I've forgiven them in my heart. I don't wish them ill. I hope they've learned something from this experience, that they'll treat others better in the future. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean giving them access to hurt me again. Forgiveness is something I did for myself, to release the poison of resentment that was hurting only me. But boundaries, those are also for myself, to prevent future harm. If you're in a similar situation, please hear this. You are not obligated to maintain relationships with people who harm you, even if they're family. Especially if they're family, because family members have unique access to hurt you in ways strangers never could. Your first obligation is to yourself, to your safety, to your well-being. Anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't have to live with the consequences of that advice. And if you're feeling guilty about setting boundaries, about choosing yourself, about walking away from toxic family dynamics, know that you're not alone. That guilt is real, but it doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're human, navigating an impossible situation with as much grace as you can muster. Some days I handle it better than others. Some days I'm strong and certain in my choices. Other days I cry and wonder if there was something else I could have done. Some way I could have fixed this without losing my children. But then I remember the documents, the emails, the forged signatures. I remember Sandra's voice in the hospital hallway talking about opportunity. I remember Marcus planning a competency hearing. And I know that I made the only choice available to me. They didn't leave me a path back to them that didn't require me to sacrifice myself entirely. And I'm done sacrificing myself for people who see me as a means to an end rather than a person worthy of respect. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this long, difficult story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, and there were probably moments where you wanted to reach through your screen and shake some sense into me. Believe me, I want to shake my past self too. But I also want to hug her. That woman who tried so hard to believe the best of her children, who loved so fiercely that she made herself vulnerable to exploitation. She wasn't stupid. She was hopeful. She was loyal. She embodied values that, in a better world, would have been rewarded rather than punished. The problem wasn't her love. The problem was that her children chose to abuse that love rather than honor it. I'm telling you all this from my porch in Phoenix, the one I almost lost. It's sunset, and the sky is doing that thing it does here, turning shades of orange and pink that seem impossible. Copper is asleep at my feet, his gray muzzle twitching in some dog dream. Tomorrow, I have my writers' group, and next week, I'm speaking at a senior center about financial exploitation. The saguaro cacti I planted 37 years ago tower over my front yard now, arms reaching toward the sky like they're celebrating something. Maybe they are. Maybe they're celebrating survival, resilience, the stubborn insistence on growing even in harsh conditions. I feel a kinship with those cacti. We've both weathered storms. We both have scars. But we're still here, still reaching upward. My life is mine again. It's not the life I imagined it would be at this age. I thought I'd be surrounded by loving family, babysitting grandchildren, hosting elaborate holiday dinners, being the matriarch of a loving, functional family unit. That dream died, and I've had to grieve it the same way I grieved Robert's death. But in its place, I've built something different. Smaller, maybe, but infinitely more authentic and genuine. I have friends who choose to spend time with me, not because they're obligated or because they want something, but because they genuinely enjoy my company. I have hobbies that fulfill me. I have purpose through my advocacy work. I have freedom to make my own choices without someone undermining my autonomy. Sandra and Marcus reached out last month, asking if we could reconcile. I'm not ready yet. Maybe someday, but that day isn't today. Forgiveness is a process, and I'm still in the middle of it. My grandchildren are adults now, or nearly so. I hope one day they'll seek me out, ask for my side of the story. I hope their parents told them the truth, but I'm not holding my breath. Tyler is in college now. I found out through a mutual acquaintance. He's studying engineering, apparently. Emma is a junior in high school, interested in art. I've never seen her artwork, never been to her shows or recitals. That loss aches in a way I can't quite describe. But I've had to accept that some losses are the price of self-protection. Maybe when they're older, when they're independent from their parents, we'll have a chance to build something. Until then, I hold them in my heart and hope they know, somehow, that I love them. What I have now is peace. It's not the life I imagined when I was raising my kids, planning for a future full of family gatherings and grandparent duties. But it's authentic. It's mine. And nobody can take it away from me. I'd love to know, what city are you listening from? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know.